Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome, and thank you for joining us for the final installment of this academic year of the Friday Forum Series. We're thrilled to have attendees from the university throughout the state and region joining us today. Before we get started, I would ask you to take a moment with me as I share with you our university land acknowledgement. This land, which is named for the Ute tribe, is the traditional and ancestral homeland of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshu, and Ute tribes. The University of Utah recognizes and respects the enduring relationship that exists between many indigenous peoples and their traditional homelands. We respect the sovereign relationship between tribes, states, and the federal government. And we affirm the University of Utah's commitment to a partnership with Native nations and urban Indian communities through research, education, and community outreach activities. I also want to take a moment and share with you that tonight the Korean American Association of Greater Atlanta is holding a worldwide vigil for the victims of the Atlanta shooting. And we also want to acknowledge the grief of our friends and colleagues at CU Boulder as they experience their own moment at this time. Friday Forums. Friday Forums is a commitment of the University of Utah to demonstrate to the state and region to elevate national conversations and showcase models of disrupting complicit racism. Throughout the year, we held sessions to engage national leaders in discussions and provide opportunities for participants to share ideas on actionable items towards leading us towards a diverse, equitable, and inclusive campus. I'm so excited about today's forum, The Long Game, Deepening the Work. Senior Vice President of Academic Affairs, Dan Reed, will lead a panel of leaders who will share how they have disrupted racism and systemic inequity and what they built in its place and what we must do together to inspire and sustain the necessary and lasting changes in higher education. Before I turn my attention to our panelists, a few housekeeping items. During this discussion, panelists will be answering questions developed that were previously submitted questions and then put into themes by our moderator. And if you have any technological problems, please use the chat bot to request assistance. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Senior Vice President of Academic Affairs, Dan Reed. Our panelists, each of them have extensive bios, but I'm going to highlight just a couple of items about their accomplishments. Dr. Daniel A. Reed is the Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs at the University of Utah. Previously, he was the Vice President for Research and Economic Development, University Chair in Computational Science and Bioinformatics, and Professor of Computer Science at the University of Iowa. He also served as Microsoft's Corporate Vice President for Technology and Extreme Computing, and perhaps commuting, I don't know that part. Andy Rotham-Noonan has been the Executive Director of the National Science and Technology Medals Foundation for the past 6 years. He is responsible for oversight of the organization, management of staff, and ensuring that the foundation's mission is evident in all of its work. Andy also has been leading an incredible commitment and demonstrated commitment towards equity and STEM. Dr. Mildred Garcia serves as the president of the American Association of State Colleges and Universities, ASCU, and as ASCU's president, Dr. Garcia is an advocate for public higher education at the national level, working to influence federal policy on behalf of nearly 400 member colleges, universities, and systems. She is the first Latina to lead one of the 6 presidentially based higher education associations in Washington, D.C. And that was not her first. She has had many firsts in her career. Dr. Leroy M. Morishita was president of California State University eBay from 2011 to 2020. And prior to this, he served as the executive vice president for administration and finance and chief financial officer of San Francisco State University after holding positions of successive responsibility during 30 years at the institution. And we are happy that Dr. Morishita is joining us in his few months after retirement. Thank you all. Dan, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm really delighted to be here today and to welcome our panelists. As Dr. Villarreal said, in the long game, deepening the work, our Friday forum will invite us to reflect on what we've learned and how we've changed some of our practices, but equally importantly, to interrogate our own relationships and our approaches to anti-racism. Today, our panelists will share how they have disrupted racism and systemic inequality, what they built in its place, and what we must all do together to inspire and sustain the necessary and lasting changes in higher education. And I should say, as a prelude, we in the run up to this, all agreed that we wanted to have a conversation, and so we're going to be informal and use our phones throughout. So do understand that's not a lack of respect; it's a mutual agreement that we want to have a collaborative conversation here. As Dr. Villarreal mentioned, I want to acknowledge that we received several really terrific questions, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can as we talk through some themes as part of this conversation. So let me jump off, and one of the other hats I wear is as a member of the U.S. National Science Board, which oversees the National Science Foundation. And one of the things we spent a great deal of time talking about is the disproportionate lack of participation of underrepresented groups in STEM fields. And so let's start with a little bit of conversation. We know that statistics, while access and equality are getting better on our college campus, we still have a ton of work to do. In 2016, underrepresented minority students received only 22% science and engineering bachelor's degrees, and only 9% of all science and engineering doctorate degrees. In the NSF Vision 2030 document, we referred to this as the missing million. And the fact that it's millions speaks to the challenge before us. So let me sort of start with the conversation around that. And let me begin uh, with with uh, uh, with Millie and ask her, how do we go around addressing this issue? What can we do that will make a difference, engaging more people in STEM fields and addressing this systemic inequality?
Thank you so much, Dan, and thank you to Mary Ann and the University of Utah to be with the distinguished panel. Let me begin by saying that we have to have a comprehensive plan that is consistent and that is intentional, and that we have to go outside of our institutions in order to reach the first gen, the low income, the students of color, to understand what the STEM field is all about. We know that when you are first gen and come from poor families and maybe come from another country and are immigrants, don't understand the options that are in front of you. How do you do that? You do that by utilizing the nonprofits in your in your catchment area, wherever you are, starting early in the sixth grade, having students be exposed to these amazing careers and opportunities. When I was president of Cal State Dominguez Hills, we had a math and science high school there. And I would always see these very privileged children, quite frankly, because they were chosen to build rocket ships, to do things. And I'm saying we should be doing that in all our schools. The second thing I would say that institutions have to do is speak to families in their language and in their neighborhoods so that they too will understand what are the options and what STEM fields will open up for their family members. When I was at Dominguez Hills again, we had an amazing fair, all in Spanish, because the community was changing in Spanish, from kindergarten all the way to graduate school, with tables set up like IKEA. Everybody spoke Spanish. We thought that first year on a Saturday, we would have about 500 to 1,000 people. We had over 5,000 families on our campus wanting to know how to get their children into college and understanding the multiple opportunities and careers that are out there. And finally, I'll give you one example from the California State University system. They have this poster that starts at the 6th grade, and every year what they have to accomplish in order to get into the CSU, in there is science and STEM and math, things that they need. And we would tell parents to put that on their bulletin boards, put it on the refrigerator, and to monitor what is going on. So let me stop there because I could continue talking about this for a long time.
All right, Leroy, what's your perspective on what we can do to make a difference here?
Okay, well, thank you, Dan, and thank you to Marianne, and thank you to the University of Utah for having us here. And I'm glad to be with my fellow panelists here, very much so. So, Millie and I are very close, and I don't want to say I disagree with her, but I want to elaborate a little bit on what she had to say, because she said a lot of good things. I would propose that we need to start with our children almost from the moment they're born, because we need to, at preschool level, we need to prepare them and getting them into the math kind of concepts and ideas. Because if they don't have that preparation by the time they get to kindergarten, they are not going to move forward into the next level of mathematics and even be able to consider science types of careers. So I would propose that we need to really start as early as possible, teaching parents. And when I was at Cal State East Bay, we were very fortunate. We were one of the first 5 to get the Promised Neighborhoods grants. And so we worked with the parents, and I got a donor to give money so they can give math lesson types of things that parents can utilize from their child from a very, very early age. So I would say we need to do that. As Millie said, we need to let parents know and students know what types of careers and options they have available. One of the things that we had done too was to work with Bayer Corporation, and they had a career day. So they would have students of all ages come, and the scientists and others at Bayer would come out and talk about what they did. And so our students learned, young people learned about different opportunities that were available. Because, I mean, what do we all know, right? I mean, I grew up, I saw Perry Mason on TV, I saw Dr. Welby and other people. I thought that's all there were. These were the only careers available, right? And so what we see and who we see representing those too is important. So we need to get people that look like the students that we're trying to recruit that go to these career days and be representative of who has achieved and the possibilities that exist for our students, the underrepresented students. And when they get to college, I know Andy's had asked me a question about this. We talked the other day. It is that in college, we need to help to make a smooth transition. The students might have been very well prepared and very well connected in high school and through the elementary schools and had support. And we need to continue that. And I know Millie did that at Fullerton, at Dominguez Hills. We did that at Cal State East Bay. But we need to make a smooth transition for students coming from the high schools, particularly from underrepresented, low socioeconomic backgrounds, first gens who don't have that kind of experience, and to make college seem like it's really seamless going from the high school to the college environment.
Thanks for that. You touched on something I think is really important, and that's role models. People that folks see that reflect their lived experience and connection. So, Andy, what's your perspective on how we can address this huge disparity?
Wow, that's a great question. I appreciate the honor it's an honor to be here on this panel. So again, I appreciate the opportunity, and thank you for the University of Utah for putting this together. I think these types of discussions are needed and necessary and important to understanding what needs to come next and the work that needs to be done. To your question, I think, one of the things that we do at our organization is that we've identified the intervention point as the undergraduate student, right, in the undergraduate years, especially when it comes to trying to chip away at that attrition rate that's so alarmingly high, specifically in underrepresented groups in STEM. And I think, to your point, Dan, I think there is a role model component. So it's the recruitment and retention of professors from underrepresented groups. I refuse to believe that there isn't that talent out there. I know that there is that talent out there, and making it intentional at the leadership level at a campus to recruit individuals to the faculty to tenure track, which we know is a really sort of important component of this conversation, will also make it clear to the students who are coming in that they themselves can do this as well. You can't fairly expect a member of an underrepresented community in STEM to arrive on a campus, look around and see no one that looks like them, to then say, you know what, I'm going to be okay. That is not a fair expectation. In fact, it's setting a standard that will ultimately lead to either burnout, a lack of support, and an unwillingness to see this as an opportunity rather than a challenge, which if we're talking about empowerment and we're talking about retention, has to be the focus. It has to be about how can we empower students, how can we define them by their assets and make sure that they know that they can go do this because of people that they see themselves in are doing it as well. So I think that's a really important component in terms of identifying retention of faculty members from diverse backgrounds, from inclusive backgrounds, so we can seek that equitable future. The second thing is resource commitment to students, right? So and we're talking about students in terms of their holistic development. So we're not just talking about technical skill set development. We're talking about destigmatize the notion of asking for help when it comes to your mental health and wellness. It's making sure that students, specifically students in underrepresented groups, while occupying a space that's built by white men for white men, that they have people who understand that, one, that can be traumatic. That is traumatic. It is oftentimes a hostile space, and there's a support network behind them that can aid them in maneuvering in that space that was not built for them. Until the time comes where that space is then built by a diverse and inclusive group, that needs to be a component in terms of support structure of students on campus. Like everyone on this panel, I could say a bunch more, but I'll just stop there.
Well, maybe I'll ask before we go on to another question, a follow-up related to this. And this is a STEM-specific question, and then we'll broaden it to education in general. But one thing that I often think is true is that people in STEM fields, the research that takes place on campus, that's really the vibrant activity. That's the life of what STEM is often about, and how we engage students in experiential education outside the classroom. The faculty, students, and staff is another piece of that sort of spreading the I can do this and there are people like me doing this. So any thoughts on balance of how we connect people to out of the classroom experiences?
I truly believe in paid internships for low-income first-gen and students of color.
Yeah.
They cannot give up the job they have to help support themselves and their families in order to take unpaid internships. It's just not going to happen. So I am a true believer that the institution has to take the responsibility of finding those opportunities in the STEM fields and other fields and connect that student to those opportunities, because that's how you get them to experiences outside of the classroom. And I just want to follow up on something that Andy said, which I think is so true on role models. You have to also look at your tenure promotion criteria, because these faculty members have a cultural tax on their shoulders. And when they help students of color and low income and first gen, that is not counted. And so for them, they are being pushed and pulled and required to be on committee, to be role models, to do the research, to get the grants, and to teach.
And maybe not get paid for that service as well, right? There's that issue too, is faculty not getting paid for that service. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And get overwhelmed with everybody coming to them, all the underrepresented students identifying with them and overwhelming them, and they wanting to help and assist. It is a real problem.
And they have choices, right?
No.
They're STEM faculty members. They can go anywhere else, right? They can even go into industry and make more money 9 times out of 10.
And the other thing in terms of what
Excellent
Millie
point.
talked about of trying to get paid internships would be to really get alums who have been successful out there coming and talking to students and then offering them opportunities. We've done that where we've had alums come and they go into little groups and then they'll offer to assist the students with their resumes, with looking at different types of opportunities. So I think there's a lot of things that we can do in that realm.
Really does take a village. So let me follow up with one of the questions that was submitted from the audience. And Leroy, I'm going to start with you this time. How do we think about increasing the representation of BIPOC students on campuses and in higher education in general? And that's not just students, but as we were just talking appropriately, faculty and staff representation as well. And how do we do that in a way that, as you just rightly noted, and Millie did too, doesn't wind up overwhelming the people that we have recruited so that we can build a robust ecosystem?
Well, one of the things I was proud of Cal State East Bay, and it was started like this when I was there, but it really blossomed, is that we were considered one of the most diverse public four-year universities in the country. And we had a large, diverse population of students, about 35% Latino, about 25% Asian, 14% Caucasian, and about 11% African American. So it's really diverse, and there was a critical mass of students. And staff was probably reflective of that also, but our faculty weren't, our tenure track faculty in particular. And that's an important area that we were trying to tackle and working on. And part of it was one of the things I did that I was proud of. I hired a university diversity officer. I created that position. It's a cabinet level position at Cal State East Bay, where the person sits on the cabinet and really tries to help us in all of our areas, in the academic side, in student affairs, in advancement area, and administration and finance. But we really tried to look at some of the recruitment policies, and that's where I think, as Millie talked about very appropriately, looking at the tenure track and the qualifications to get tenured. But also in the hiring practices, we started to look and having people write about what types of things, experiences they've had in terms of culturally diverse students. How have they worked with them? What have they done? What do they know about that? And making that an integral part of the application for faculty, regardless of discipline, that it was that you have to really identify those kinds of things. So you begin there, and basically you are then stating that your institution is really concerned about this, wanting to really bring in a diverse, or at least a culturally competent faculty who know how to deal with it and work with students of different groups and coming from different levels. And so part of it was really to trying to build that. I think that's one of the areas that you have to do as an institution, try to show that there's a commitment from the very top all the way through in terms of really being concerned about the success, not just bringing in students, not just the access point, but also access and then success of the students in graduating and going on to a fruitful career.
So, Andy, your take.
Well, I mean, shoot, I mean, he covered a lot, and it's all incredibly important. And the work that you've done, Leroy, is really incredible. I mean, that's the type of stuff that I think institutions should take and start to see if they can recreate or templatize it, knowing that each campus is unique and the students at each campus, their needs are unique as well. But that type of commitment, the type of intentionality is the level of thoroughness that's going to change things for the better. I think one of the things that's interesting when we do our work is we go to campuses, or we used to go to campuses, but we host events where we're giving access to individuals that the students on campus wouldn't necessarily get opportunities to have access to in the first place. And what we found on sort of a qualitative level in terms of testimonials in our survey follow-ups is like, there's no telling how many students who say, this came at the exact right time. I needed someone who looked like me to tell me that I could go do these things. And that's qualitative, but I don't think it's the exception, it's the rule these days. It's how can I know that I'm going to be able to affect change? How can I know that I'm going to be able to get to that tenure track position to affect change in that leadership position when no one who's had my experience or my background has done that? I think there's a broader conversation that needs to maybe happen is how do we define merit within the STEM and academic community? What is merit at the faculty level? Is it meritorious to be a researcher who brings a ton of funds to the organization? Is it meritorious to be a teacher that cultivates the next generation? And then maybe you have the rarity, which is the person who can do both, but that person only has a certain amount of bandwidth. So the bigger question, or one of the questions that kind of we think about and we talk about a lot is how do we define that merit? Because there's a lot of really good reasons to think that they're both just as important. Maybe even more important is the faculty member who's the teacher first, who says, I know that I need to cultivate this talent. I know that I need to be this person that these students can lean on and rely on. And there's a balance that needs to be struck here that I think can also yield students who recognize that there's value in the faculty member, not just as this incredible innovator or discoverer, but also as a support structure, a network for this individual to tap into. So that's just something that like we think about. It's something maybe I wanted to put out there, but it's something that in that conversation about merit, if it's in a community that's been built, I want to say this again, that's been built by white men for white men, merit is going to look very different than if that definition has been created by those who are diverse and if by a group that's both diverse and inclusive.
So, Melly, I heard Leroy talk about the importance of reinforcing institutional culture from the top, but also to try to make it systemic. And Andy talked about reward metrics, and we all know that metrics reward and punish, and the metrics you choose communicate your values. So, as you think about how we address the broader issue, what do you think are the things that we can do that will make a difference?
I'm going to add that, all institutions have to become an educational laboratory. When I walked into one of my institutions, which shall remain nameless, there were 3, so you can't pick which one it was. They did not know the ethnicity of their students, the neighborhoods they came from, what were the numbers, what was retention rate. So the very first thing, the institution has become an educational laboratory and become learners of the students that they serve and the communities in which they serve. I think that's extremely important. The way I've done that is that I had a large group of not only the vice presidents, I brought in the academic deans, I brought in the chair of the academic senate, the chair of the faculty budget committee, the student leadership, which would be president of student government, and we sat and we asked each dean to look at the students in their colleges and learn about them with their colleges and come and make a presentation to this entire group. And they did that at every meeting. So every meeting, one dean had a chance to talk about it. And we were able to ask questions about retention, about graduation. Did they speak? What was the first language they spoke about? So people started to learn who we were serving. Like Leroy, I also hired I changed a position and I made it vice president for human resources, diversity, and inclusion, because I felt that everybody you hire has to be looked at and brought into the institution with those eyes, focusing on equity, student success, and finding people that will mirror who we were serving. So that was extremely important as well. So those are some of the examples that I've used as I led these institutions.
Terrific. Thank you all. I want to turn to a related topic, and in the round robin spirit, Andy, we're going to start with you this time. So, you lead the National Technology Medals, which those of you who don't know is dedicated to supporting first year and unrepresented undergraduate from enrollment to graduation around 10 degrees. And yet, as we talked about at the outset, we have missing millions, and we also know, as we've talked about, their challenges with attrition as well. So there is the recruiting students, but there's also equally importantly ensuring, as you talked about earlier, that they have a path to success while they're on campus. So what do you think are some of the most effective interventions in a student's journey to keep them connected to the campus and ensure?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I think about intervention and I think about successfully intervening in a student's life to come to retain their interest in STEM, and then to be a STEM major, because that's what we're talking about first. Are they interested, and then can we lead them down that path? I think it's sort of kind of a 3-pronged approach, or at least I could go on. There's probably more, but there's a network development component. So that's not only creating spaces for conversations of connection between peer to peer, but peer to maybe an advisor role or a coach role, as well as peer to a network that's off campus. And I think it's important that you expand beyond the campus so that students become knowledgeable of what's available to them upon their matriculation or upon graduation. So it doesn't necessarily have to be only the students or the faculty or the coach on campus. It should be a network that expands beyond that. The second thing is create spaces that are safe. So one of the things that we focus on is that when we are working with our students and our mentors, our mentees are trained in trauma-informed facilitation. It's not extensive training, but it's enough to know that when you're entering this space, it's free of judgment. When you're entering that space, there's a level of accountability and respect that occurs in that space. And being able to signal to students, and students from underrepresented groups that live in the country, let's be honest, is more hostile than I think a lot of us are willing to admit. Creating that space is imperative to build trust with those students, but it's also imperative to signal to them that they themselves are in a community, at least in that sort of subsection, in a community that values them and values their assets and values their opportunity. And then the third thing is cash. And to go back to the original statement, pay the students for their time, pay the students for their expertise, pay the students for their experience, because experience alone won't get you to where you want to get to, because it will force students from low socioeconomic backgrounds, first gen, to actually have to make compromises on what they want to do and what they have to do. And in terms of educational experience, why would we want to force a student to make that decision? Aren't we now forcing them not to do something? Why not enable them or empower to do something? And I think monetary compensation of any kind, something that's fair, something that's equitable, is really important when it comes to that sort of intervention level that we're talking about.
So I think you hit on something that was touched on earlier, but it's really important. This notion that I think we often tend to treat all of our students the same once they're admitted, but the breadth of path and opportunities and the constraints that different students have are widely different. So offering something that, as you said, requires people to make choices that they really shouldn't have to make really puts people in a difficult situation. Melly, I wanted to turn to you in that third as well and say, if you were speaking to an individual faculty member, what would be your advice to say, this is how, with the resources you have, you can most make?
I think, Andy said it so well, but I'm going to use different words. I'm going to say, love what you do and love your students. Care about your students. I would also tell them, engage your students in your research. What a wonderful way of getting them excited about the work that you as a faculty member find exciting. And you're trying to recreate these new STEM majors or whatever major that may be to be part of the academy. I always told the faculty, students come, and this is Andy's point, come to college when they're low income first gen and students of color because they want out of poverty. They want to help their families. They want to help their communities. It is up to us as faculty members to make them fall in love with education. That's our role. And the way to do that is love, care, engage them. Intrusive advising. I'm not opposed to intrusive advising at all, because sometimes they're afraid to come and ask for questions. They're not used to that. In some cultures, professors are like stand away from us. And so for them, it's intrusive advising. And of course, paid internship and whatever it is that they're doing, pay them for what they're worth.
Leroy, your perspective?
Yes, I agree with my panelists, my co-panelists here. They have hit a lot of great points. And I think, one of the things that I've loved about the CSU and the institutions I've worked at within the CSU is that our undergraduates get opportunities in the classroom with their teachers doing research, right? Whether it be in the sciences, whether it be in the social sciences, elsewhere, whatever, they get that opportunity, which is pretty unique. One of my first experiences was a underrepresented student was on a science fair day. NSF had made us move. We usually do one every other year, but we moved it that year that I began. And an underrepresented student came up to me and said, Mr. President, I'd like to ask you a question. I said, sure. He says, I want to know how I give back to the university. And I said, did you graduate already? He said, no, I'm going to graduate next spring, but I want to know how to give back. And I said, why do you want to give back? He says, because when I applied to school, and I can say this because I'm an alum of that other institution up the road, when my buddies and I all applied to go to school, we all wanted to go to UC Berkeley. He said, they got admitted, I didn't. I got admitted to Cal State East Bay. And they said, it's too bad, you're going to get a lesser education. And he says, but I came here. From my sophomore year on, I was in the labs with my professor working on research projects, working in the labs, doing things. My buddies at Cal had to pay for outside time in labs to do any lab work. And he said, so I have the last laugh. I got a better education than they did. And so I think that's an important part, and Millie had talked about that. I think it's just invaluable that students have that experience with their faculty member, working on their research, being co-authors of their papers. I mean, having those kinds of things and seeing that they could do it, that I have that ability. And again, there's no dumb questions, right? Andy talked about those safe spaces. And one of the things, and we stole it, obviously, you steal from places that do good work. Georgia State had that chat bot, right? That's a great way to get to answers to questions that you think are really stupid. I'm just a first gen. What do I know? I don't know anything. But you can ask the chat bot and they'll give you an answer and turn you to other resources. So I think it's offering all those opportunities for our students to feel that they can ask questions. They don't have to know everything the moment they come onto our campuses.
Yeah, I sometimes like to say that, we have gone to something basic. We can easily get caught up in process, money, and other things. And we're all, part of non-religious public institutions. There's a very real sense in what we're doing is a holy thing. We hold spirits and the dreams of children in our hand. It's really important that we not lose sight of that. That's North Star. That really motivates the things that we need to do. And Leroy, I want to turn back to you with another question. This is one of our submitted questions, and it's really sometimes about disconnect between work done in diversity and inclusion and student awareness and engagement. And so the gap between sometimes what the institution might think that it's doing and how it reaches ground. I sometimes like to say that many issues are like rain in the desert. It has this tendency to evaporate before it hits the ground. So how do we bridge that gap and help communicate and engage people so there's useful feedback so we can continue to make progress?
I think it's important, and I think Millie gave a great example of that. You bring to light to whether it's deans, vice presidents, department chairs, faculty, and staff, to units, the reality of who our students are and what they're experiencing. We all have good intentions, I believe, for the most part, okay? And we try to do some things and set up some structures and organizations or groups or meetings, committees, whatever, to do the right thing and set up programs. But if we don't get feedback on how successful or not we are with those programs and what we're doing for those students, then that is not going to help change things. We have to know whether we're successful, whether what we're trying to, the problems or the issues that we think we're addressing are really addressing those issues for the students. And so I think the more information you can collect, the more data we can collect about the success of our students, what's causing some to succeed, others not to succeed, and really trying to do that and making people aware of that. Because that's the whole point, that people, we can live in our ignorance very easily and think that, okay, well, we're doing it, we're teaching this, and Andy's not picking it up, but Millie is. Well, obviously I must be doing a good job. Millie's got it, but I don't know what's wrong with Andy. He's probably not working very hard, right? But Andy might have other issues going on that he's dealing with that is causing him not to succeed, not because he's stupid and incapable of learning, but that he really just is, other things have intervened at that moment in time. whether it be family issues. I mean, for a lot of our students, it's financial, family kinds of concerns, things that they do. So I think you have to make sure people understand what's going on and what the results are of the work they're doing.
So, Millie, what's your perspective on how we can bridge this gap?
I think Leroy spoke really well about getting everybody's input. I would like to add the student voice and how do you capture that student voice? You must listen to your students. And we've got to find multiple ways of doing that. There are a lot of ways depending on the campus you're at, right? So of course there's always the intrusive survey that goes online before a class that you can't get out of it. It eventually comes back, and we did get a lot of great responses. But it's important that you read the written comments, that students take the time to let you know what they're really feeling. I think that is, I don't care how big it is. We did that at Fullerton with over 40,000 students, and we did get a high percentage of students writing in comments about what they thought was great, and of course, a lot of what they thought wasn't. And we had to pay attention to what they were trying to tell us about the environment, about having a welcoming space, about not having enough people of color in front of them in the classrooms or in staff offices. Got to pay attention. You've got to use their phone. You've got to use their Snapchats and their Instagrams and whatever way that you get to them in order to get their voice. Using your student leaders. I used it with that team from the president's office, but I also met with all the presidents of the multicultural groups and had them come and sit with me every semester. And I would have the vice presidents with me. So they would hear what those students were sharing from their perspectives. And then we would make sure we try to reach, because some students go to school at night. Let's not forget them, and they're adults. And we need to hear their voice as well. And actually, in the student success teams we had in each college, they would actually call a percentage of their students randomly selected by age, ethnicity, gender, to find out how they were doing and listening to their voices.
Andy, any thoughts from you?
I mean, yeah, one couple things. I mean, they're great, Leroy and Millie. They're fantastic explanations. Leroy, you touched on something that the phrase we use is the blank slate protocol. No one's a blank slate when they show up into the classroom. There's something else going on. There's always something else going on. It can be as trivial as I didn't get enough sleep last night and that might be because of stress or anxiety, which that's not trivial, to like, I'm watching my Black, Brown, and AAPI brothers and sisters get killed. And like that alone is something that needs to be named and talked about and said out loud. And you can't expect a student to function in a space where that's happening and then not actually make the effort to hear them in that moment. Millie, to your point, which is just the feedback is it's about meeting the students where they are, because that's where you're going to get the most honest feedback. So that's, Millie, to your point, that's platforms. That's like, where can you get the best feedback loops? Is it, is it TikTok? And I barely understand TikTok as it is, but like, is it Facebook? Is it, what is the best medium where you can have the highest rate of response, where the students are like, I know that I can say this thing aloud to this individual because this is the medium I'm most comfortable with, right? So it's this like, we talk about this, like meeting someone where they are, which is incredibly important. You should not beckon someone into your space. You should meet them either at a collective table or say, I'm coming into your space where you are safe. I'm not going to be hostile. And you're going to tell me I'm going to ask you some questions and you're going to give me feedback. But it has to be that idea of sort of this mutual coming together. And so and then being willing to say, you know what? It's okay not to be in the right headspace right now. I'm going to lend you grace, or I'm going to lend grace to this environment, knowing that it's okay to be like, I can't do this. I've got too much going on. And that's a very human thing to say. And we shouldn't punish or we shouldn't ignore students' either unwillingness or willingness to actually speak up and say, I just, not right now. I'm sorry. There's just too much going on. Those are two phrases we use a lot in our organization. And Leroy and Millie, you were really kind of hitting on both points really well.
Andy, the other thing I would add to what you just said was, as administrators, we need to be seen as approachable. And we have to get out of our offices and let them feel comfortable for students to come up to us and talk to us. You know, that idea of stay in our offices, we have a lot of professional development programs for people who want to be presidents or vice presidents, et cetera. And that's one of the things we talk about. If you have to be student centered, they have to see you as someone that they can trust and that they can talk to you when you're walking down or you walk into the cafeteria and sit down at one of those tables.
That's a great point. I was just going to riff on that and what Andy said and about how do we help meet people where they are and build those kind of support networks that really engage people. And Leroy, if you want to add anything to that, what both those previous great comments.
Yeah, I think it is that whole point of building up trust, that you are approachable, that you are somebody that is willing to listen and you're not going to react. I think that Andy said that well, where you're not going to get defensive and suddenly put up all your things and say, no, that, I was doing this, I was doing that, not explaining yourself, but listening genuinely to what the student is saying. Because that's the most difficult thing, right? For people to become vulnerable, to make themselves vulnerable, whether you're an administrator, whether you're a professor, whether you're that student, right? And so you've got to build up that sense of trust that you can say what you believe and you accept it. That's your lived experience. That's the reality of your life right now and what you're experiencing, And then how do I, as the faculty member or staff member or administrator, then deal with that, then accept that, and then try to figure out how do we resolve that? How can we assist you in terms of being more successful?
So one of the questions that came in as a prelude to this really was part of, I think, a theme, and it's a question of how does one person in a big institution like a college or university or a large nonprofit or any other large group really make a difference? Because lots of people feel powerless due to hierarchy, politics, time constraints. So what are ways to help individuals actually feel like that, yes, I personally can make a difference? And feel free, whoever wants to jump in on that first.
I'll start. I think number one is, as an individual person, you have a voice, and you can use that voice in multiple ways. You can use that voice in media. You can use that voice in writing letters. You can use that voice to people at your institution. You can use your voice. Secondly, as an individual, you can find allies. There are allies on no matter what group you belong to, have allies that will work with you for that common cause. 3, find yourself a seat at the table. I love Shirley Chisholm's quote. Find yourself a seat at the table, look for that seat at the table, and if they don't let you in, bring a folding chair. But, it is about you being bold. It is about sticking to your North Star. It is about believing in your values and making sure that you keep marching on. Because there are so many people that came before us that did it on their own and brought people along.
I want to speak. Go ahead, Leroy, please.
I was going to add to what Millie had to say, that I think is in offering people that opportunity for the voice, right? One of the things I did was to meet with faculty on a regular basis. I had coffee clutches. They just got invited, and then they chose, given a time, and they chose to come for an hour just to be able to hear what's going on so that I would know what the faculty are experiencing and what's going on in the classroom. And the same thing you do with students or you do with staff. You offer those kind of opportunities as a leader at every level, right? So you want to get your deans and your vice presidents and directors to do that with their teams and department chairs so that they can hear what's going on. So to give people opportunity to voice concerns, issues, and for them to be listened to at every level. And so I think it's really important that we try to offer those opportunities and model that as leaders to our teams, so they will do the same thing to get kind of feedback and to do that. As I said, it's difficult because people don't like to be vulnerable, right? Because you hear some things you don't want to hear, but you've got to accept that that's going to come. No matter what, either it's going to sit there in silence and they're going to be mad at you, or you're going to hear about it and then maybe you can do something about it.
I mean, these are fantastic. I think the interesting thing is read. There is so much work that has been done on these topics. Don't ask an individual of color to help you if you're from a position of privilege. Do the work, do the reading, do the podcast listening, do the engagement necessary to start to educate yourself around the power dynamics that when you enter the room, what you create, because that alone takes a level of self-reflection that can allow you to actually understand what it takes to be an ally. And actually a term that I'm going to take from Frederick Ingram. He's a member of faculty at UT Arlington, a co-conspirator. Are you a co-conspirator? If you see something that's happening in a classroom, in a space that is toxic, or it's perpetuating racism, perpetuating sexism, are you going to stand up and say something? If you don't, then you aren't actually participating in this new development, this needed social reckoning. You are not empowering. You are, in fact, just being a bystander. And I think that's a really important point if we're going to talk about allyship. Allyship is active every day. It is about being in it. And when I use the term co-conspirator, it implies that you have to be willing to understand that in order for people of color from underrepresented group to succeed in this space, to succeed in this structure, it is a conspiracy against that system that will actually lead to that. And then eventually we'll get to a point, hopefully, in this lifetime where it won't be that case. But that's an important sort of level of commitment required, that if you are going to claim the term ally, you better be doing the work, and you better be doing it every day. And you also shouldn't be asking for credit for it, because this is a human experience. And if you're going to spend time dehumanizing other people or not doing the things when that dehumanization happens in your presence, you're not helping. You're not helping. And I think that's an important thing to name aloud.
Thank you, Andy. Yeah, I really agree with that. That bystander intervention is vital, right? In all realms, in all cases, whether it's against people because of their race, their gender, whatever their sexual preference, whatever. If we sit silent, then we are condoning it. We are accepting and saying that, in our via our silence, even if we believe the opposite, if we don't intervene, then we are being part and parcel of the problem. And I think we need to step up in all cases.
Martin Luther King said it best: silence is betrayal.
Yeah.
And so it is betrayal. And I also stole a term from a faculty member at UCLA. He calls it, we all have to be bold, angelic troublemakers.
Yes.
Like that.
Good trouble.
Yes.
So I want to turn to a sad but topic. And Dr. Villarreal mentioned it in her opening remarks. We'd all be remiss if we didn't acknowledge what happened in Atlanta a few days ago. Mass shooting of 8 people, 6 of whom were Asian women, at 3 different businesses. And it seems increasingly likely based on the investigation that prosecutors may well classify this as a hate crime. Certainly, if it is confirmed to be racially motivated, it's part of a pattern, an alarming increase in active violence, as well as harassment of Asians and Pacific Islanders in our culture in this country. Leroy, I wanted to ask you my start by sharing few thoughts about where we are at this crossroads in our history, and what might be words of wisdom for us to think about at this pivotal moment.
Well, I don't know about the words of wisdom, but I'll give you some of my reactions to it. And is a very terrible incident. But for Asian American Pacific Islander population, it's like it took this for people to become aware and to start to talk about the violence that has occurred against the Asian American population, in particular since the pandemic began in March 2020, but also before that. I mean, it is part and parcel of the racism that exists in our country, right? Against people of color, against discrimination against people because of their sexual orientation, because against women, I mean, it is part and parcel of that. So I think for a lot of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, it was kind of like, well, what took you so long? It took this kind of violence for people to start to say, what's going on? Acts have been occurring. Discriminatory acts have been occurring. They might not rise to the level of the police calling it a hate crime, but they have been occurring across the country. There's a group in San Francisco, from out of San Francisco State's Stop AAPI Hate, who have chronicled over 3,800 incidents that have occurred since March of 2020 against Asians across the country. And so the hotbeds have always been California, New York, but it's across the country in terms of that. But it is part of what's going on. It is a long history of anti-Asian types of activities going on in this country, just as there have been against African Americans and Chicanos and Latinos, and against our Native Americans, against all those different groups. It is a litany of history that we should be ashamed of, that we need to educate people about, and that what I would seek would be that all the people that are discriminated against band together. Don't buy into the notion that we divide and conquer, that, because Asians are successful, they're bringing you down and you're not successful. It's not one group of people that is causing that problem for another group of particularly underrepresented population. And so it's really trying to educate ourselves and to realize that we need to work together. We need to be those co-conspirators, as Andy talked about. We need to be the allies. We need to support each other. We need to be not the silent bystanders when somebody is attacked for whatever reason. I mean, whether they're a woman, whether they're lesbian or gay or whatever, or they're Asian or African American, Latino, Native American, whatever. When they get attacked, they're attacking each of us because it's perpetuating a stereotype. It's perpetuating this belief that these people are bad because of the color of their skin, because of the way they act, the way they dress, whatever. And so I would really seek that out. That would be my plea to everybody. And also, as Andy had said, educate yourself. Go and read about it. Find out more about it. Why does this exist? Where does this begin? There's all kinds of books out there, all kinds of literature, some that are better than others, but really kind of put it into a larger scale. But there have been all these incidents. And so I just ask that people look at that and try to bring it together and make sense of it in a holistic way. That yes, it is awful. And as an Asian American, I really detest it. And I really, it's really discriminatory more against Asian women than it is against the men. The high percentage, it counts against women. And so they've been, people have been marginalized in so many ways and idealized, fantasized, whatever. And that's what happens with the women in particular. But it's just a real problem. And we all hoped it would end. We all have hoped. We lived through the 60s protesting and living in 70s and trying to stop all this. And we ought to hope that things had changed, but they haven't changed. And I read the book Cast recently by Isabel Wilkerson, and she talks about the big issue is in 2042, we will no longer be a majority population in the United States. And that is scary to the people who have felt that privilege and the control that will change. And that is a kind of a tipping point that's coming our way.
Thank you, Leroy. I appreciate that thoughtful comments for what is really, truly a horrific situation. I just want to quickly, in the very little time we have left, ask if any of you would like to offer any parting thoughts that we haven't touched on just yet for our as we will transition soon to the breakout. Sorry, Melly, please go ahead.
Leroy said it so beautifully, but it is about the ignorance of people knowing our history. And how do we get back into the schools having a true history, that we learn about the discrimination and the racism that is part of this country, and go back to civic learning, and democracy to demonstrate that we are all Americans, because we have to make sure that those individuals that are going through our campuses understand what it means to be a citizen in a democratic country with a multicultural global America. And if we don't do this, we are at peril.
Couldn't agree more. 100% across the board. I'm not going to try and add there. I think the last thing I'll just say is I want to say thanks to a few people that have really shaped my worldview. That's my entire team at the NSTMF, Elsie Charity, Allison Corton, Ryan Lasker, Michelle Afflew, Joanna Chow, Kate Biddle. It's a great team. The board is fantastic, and it's important that we name the people who we want to give gratitude in these moments. I also want to say Cass is an unbelievable book. Everyone should read it. Everyone should check out Frederick Engram, who's a professor over at UT Arlington. He has some incredible things that he's talking about in terms of this co-conspirator comment. That is not my phrase, that is his. I want to be clear on that. And I wanted to say thanks for letting me be part of this. It's certainly an esteemed group, and this has been a wonderful conversation. It's conversations like these that give me hope that there's good things to look forward to. It's being able to talk to individuals like all of you that make it very clear that there are really, really smart people working on this, and I think that's really important as well. So I just want to say thanks again for that.
Well, let me end by saying thank you to each of you, to Millie, to Leroy, to Andy, for not only a thoughtful conversation, but more importantly, living the work that makes a difference. We're really grateful for you, and I'm grateful for the conversation. And with that, I'm going to turn the floor back over to my colleague, Dr. Mary Ann Villarreal.
Well, I'm a loss of words that I do need to know. I know I need to say that Dr. Reed and I are co-conspirators in the making. And I've learned from working on under Dr. Garcia with Cabinet that the work, you got to do it together. And so I want to say thank you, Juan, for entering this space and working this together. The panelists today, I think, really have changed systems. And those systems are constantly changing, and there is the long work ahead. And we have to be strategic and intentional, as I heard us say today. And how do we model, and what are we modeling, and how are we also responding to the everyday change of what we model needs to reflect all of who we are. So as we close out our Friday Forum series for this year, I hope that you take all of what we've talked about this year and think about how you will work with the Vice President for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion and work with our teams across campus to lead strategically, to lead intensively, and to lead intentionally as well. I want to thank all our partners who have been invested in this work all year long. I'll name you online. I know we have to go. I very sadly have to report to you that our session that will be led by our colleagues in Transform, Materiality of Decoloniality, it has to be canceled today due to an unforeseen illness, and we do hope that everyone recovers and heals soon. We will reschedule that. We will not miss the opportunity to be in that conversation with our colleagues. But for those of you who have signed up, please move to your breakout sessions and feel free to join other breakout sessions as we close out. So thank you, everyone.